Hi everyone, Bethany here with Atlantic Flagpole. It is week 2 of our Patriot Highlight, and I'm so excited to connect with you guys and share this week's Great American Patriot. It's been a lot of fun diving into some history, spending a little bit more time than I ordinarily would. It's kind of forced me to dig deeper and to better learn about our country's founding fathers and founding days and all of that. So this has been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to be able to share it with you. I wanted to mention 2 quick things and give credit to 2 of the sources that I'm citing. So I'm going to be reading a little bit from history.com, and then I also wanted to cite Jack Kelly, who's the author of the book Band of Giants, The Amateur Soldiers Who Won America's Independence. I recommend this book because, we've got a lot of patriots throughout history that are well known, that we learn about in school, that we all are able to reference. Everybody knows George Washington. But I love that Jack Kelly is highlighting some amateur patriots that many people wouldn't necessarily recognize just by name. So today I'm going to be sharing about Henry Knox, the American patriot. So he was a fighter from the beginning. So this article talks about Henry Knox being somebody that was a tough teenager, that was actually a street brawler in Boston. So I don't know if we have any Boston folks out there, but that's kind of a fun little edgy part of this particular patriot's background. So fighting was always in his blood. He ended up being the co-founder of the Boston Grenadier Corps, but he totally lacked military education. He was actually a bookstore owner. He sold books. The London bookstore was where he worked. And there's a couple of things that I love about this specific patriot. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention, since I've already highlighted this piece, is that he had no formal military education. And I think one of the things that's awesome about that is that I firmly believe in the philosophy that education can be achieved by a variety of different avenues. And there are those who actually believe that you are ignorant and uneducated if you don't go through like a formal education process. Yet there are some extremely successful people who've never even gone to college. There are a lot of people that have chosen a different path, and it doesn't mean that they're not educated. It just means that they receive their education a different way. If you look back in history, you see where there are a lot of people that actually were a part of mentorship programs, and that's not something you see as much of anymore. But we are seeing in my generation and the next generation a lot of self-taught people who have been able to achieve a great level of education and then use that education to be extremely successful in a variety of areas, including your career, without going through a formal education process. And so that's something that I really love about this specific patriot. He didn't have the formal military education, so his background wasn't necessarily what all people who are in the military would have accepted as making him somebody that should be leading or anything like that. But this guy knew how to find an education because he ran a bookstore, and so he just started educating himself. He got the information he needed to prepare himself for what was to come. So I love that about him. That was number 1. Number 2 is right here on history.com. It says, the plump 24-year-old bookseller quickly impressed George Washington. So it's kind of fun to see a superhero that isn't finely chiseled and perfectly beautiful in every way, shape, or form. But this hero, American hero, was actually a plump 24-year-old. So to all of us out there that are not in perfect shape, we can still be heroes even in our plumpness. So, all right, let me read a little bit more about him to you. So he impressed George Washington when he arrived in 1775 to take command of the Continental Army during the siege of Boston. And Jack Kelly actually says in his book that Knox was really responsible for the Patriots' first victory when they forced the British out of Boston. Now listen to this. I thought this was very impressive. He was tasked with transporting cannons from the recently captured Fort Ticonderoga. He managed to move heavy artillery over 300 miles. Over 300 miles. not with the same kind of equipment we have nowadays. During that time period, he actually, it says over winter terrain, he had to use enormous ox-drawn sleds. That's pretty impressive to have been able to move all of that artillery and heavy equipment 300 miles through winter terrain just using ox-drawn sleds. So that's pretty impressive. That was one of the things that he was really well known for. One thing that George Washington is actually really well known for is being his extraordinary knack for being able to read people. And so, George Washington's involvement with Henry Knox, he actually would often promote him above others that would have technically fit like the expectation, again, kind of going back to that formal military education. But George Washington was able to see in Henry Knox the potential and gave him great responsibility. Knox managed the logistics for Washington's crossing of the Delaware River and ran the siege at Yorktown that forced the British to surrender. So we've got a couple of really impressive things here, and that's just part of what this awesome patriot did. But that's just kind of my take on Henry Knox. We could dive into it more, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm in a ratty t-shirt because I promised my husband I would help him go get some yard work done. So I'm sure you've got a lot of things going on too, but I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in with me as we just take a few minutes to highlight another one of America's awesome patriotic heroes. So I will see you again next week. Feel free to comment below, share your thoughts. If there's something that I missed that you know about Henry Knox, or even something that I shared incorrectly, feel free to correct me. I always love the feedback. So I'll be looking for those comments below, and you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.